Good morning and welcome to Wednesday. So if we're honest, a lot of us, if we haven't read the Bible in its entirety, a lot of us, what we know of the Old Testament is based on growing up in church and Sunday school or VBS. And there seems to be a pattern once you get into junior high or high school, it kind of shifts into more topics and study of the New Testament, and there's a lot of study of the Gospels, the life of Jesus, which is very important, of course, but we neglect the Old Testament, I believe. And so the Old Testament speaks a lot about God's character. So I think that's why it's important that we're doing this devotion in the book of Genesis. So I say all that to point out that if your only experience of the Old Testament is through growing up in Sunday school, you probably didn't know about this story. This is one of the stories that they edited, that they pulled out of curriculum, that's not in children's curriculums. So here we're going to have kind of like a story within a story. So we have the story of Joseph that we're going through, but in the middle of this, there is the story of Judah and Tamar. And so it is Genesis 38, so I encourage you to read it on your own. And so what it says is Judah goes off and he leaves his brothers. Maybe there's a lot of guilt of selling his own brother Joseph off to Egypt. Maybe there's further dissension. We don't really know right now. We just know that he goes off and kind of does his own thing. So he marries a Canaanite, which he shouldn't have, right, because of the influence that they had. And so then he has 3 sons. So he must be gone for a bit. So he has these 3 sons, and then he has this wife. He finds this wife, Tamar, for his firstborn, and his firstborn is named And we know about these sons that he didn't raise them to love God, because it says that they did evil. The second one especially did evil in the sight of the Lord. So Tamar marries and then dies, and it says that God allowed him to die. And then what happened was that, it was judgment. It said he was wicked and the Lord brought judgment on him and death. So he was a wicked son. So then, but they were still practicing this practice that what happened is if there was other sons, the wife was to marry the next son to preserve the line of the first son of that inheritance. So the second son knew that the child of that union wouldn't be his descendant, it would be his dead brother. And so, it sounds a little complicated, but that was the practice that they had. And so his second son didn't really want that to happen, and so he refused to do that. And so God brought judgment on him, and he died as well. So there's 1 son left, right? And so Judah is a little panicky here, right? He's lost 2 sons. He doesn't see this because it's his failure to not raise his sons to know Yahweh because they did evil, right? And so he's more blaming this Tamar woman, right? He's thinking 2 sons have died. And so he's worried about, he has this 3rd son, and he's still a little young. But what happens here is he's dishonest. And he says to Tamar, why don't you go back to your father's home, and when the 3rd son is old enough, then I'll bring you back. But here's the problem here, is in that culture, what happened is as long as there was a 3rd son, she was still under the headship of Judah, right? We don't kind of understand that because, of course, now, once you're a widow, you're free, right? But she was still under his headship, and she was still kind of legally bound to marry that 3rd son. And so she wasn't free. She didn't really belong back in her father's home because she wasn't free to be married to someone else because she was still legally under that family. And so she was stuck. So here she was stuck to not be married or have any future children, and Judah was dishonest in keeping this third son from her. So she realized what Judah's doing. So this third son's getting older, and she's not brought as his wife. And so she takes matters in her own hands. And Judah's wife dies. And so he goes off to go to shear his sheep. And when he comes back, when he's on his way back, she disguised herself as a prostitute. And so he has union with her. And then he's like, what do you want for your payment? And she says the sheep. But she, as collateral, she takes his cord and, what does she take? His cord and his staff, I believe. And so she's waiting there. So she takes it, and then she takes off her prostitute clothes, goes back home, and then he comes back to give her payment, and she's not there. And he asks, who's this prostitute? And they go, there's no prostitute that's around here. And so he's kind of wondering what happens. And then she's pregnant. And so 3 months later, they realize that she's pregnant, and it gets to Judah. And of course, she's not free to get pregnant, right? She's under his family, and he's about to stone her. He says, she has death on her, and then she shows him, hello, you're the father of this baby. And so he realized his sin, and then he repents, and then she has twins. And the two babies are Perez and Zerah. And here's the clincher here. Perez is in the lineage of Jesus, right? It's the fourth son, Judah, and we'll see later how God will see how his heart has been changed, and God has mercy on him, and he's even the fourth son of Israel, but he becomes in the lineage of the Messiah. And Perez, who's the union of Tamar, even this deceitful way that was brought, this union of this baby, Perez, is still in the lineage of Jesus. So we see so much grace here, and we see so much restoration here. And even in this broken story, God is using this to redeem his people and to bring the Messiah from it. So we see beautiful redemption in this story. Amen. We'll see you tomorrow. And remember, 5 minutes a day can change your life.